The New York, I almost said football Jets. New York football Giants actually look pretty good. The New York Jets did not look good in London, where Woody used to rub elbows with the elites as an ambassador. Gets beat by Sam Darnold, the guy they kicked to the curb. And a couple days later, as of his statement, informed Robert Saleh on Tuesday morning, adios, Bob. Rough day for the bald community, but a lot of different angles off this story. And I'm going to try to dive into them all. I saw the news. I wasn't home when the news broke. So I've had a couple hours to kind of think about everything that went on here because there are a lot of connected tentacles, right? There really are. Obviously, just a coach getting fired, the GM situation, Aaron Rodgers. In a weird way, Davante is connected to this, right? Because people thought he was going to get traded to the Jets, but the reason he's on the Raiders, who also suck and have fired coaches, is because of the Packers. And if you're Gudikins and LaFleur, we're still rolling. We're the Green Bay Packers. You're the Jets. You're the Raiders. That sucks. So we just got to dive into it all because there's a lot going on. It really is. Jeff Ulbrich, guy that I grew up watching play when I was a kid, play linebacker for the 49ers, interim head coach, who's done a good job as a defensive coordinator, but clearly Woody Johnson had had enough of Bob Saleh, and his tenure comes to an end. But before we dive into the story, you guys want a pair of tickets? Baseball game, football game, college or pro concerts. Last night, Taylor Swift, she's there having a good time. Turns out the dude that makes the pick, his brothers, her dancer, all these connections, live music, jamming around, maybe a comedy show. Anyone that's on Instagram gets nonstop comedians flown at you or thrown at you in the algorithm, makes you laugh. Well, if you want to go see one of them live, do it because you take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Okay, the story of the day, Robert Saleh gets fired. And I think before we dive deep in any angle here, objectively, he was a really, really bad head coach. Nice guy. People like him. Was a good coordinator for the 49ers. But as a head coach of the New York Jets, wins and losses speak for themselves. He's 20-36. And when you watch him, you constantly ask yourself, what is he doing? And I was thinking about it this morning that certain guys, younger coaches, get their opportunity and become a CEO head coach. And we've pushed back on it over the years. A lot of you guys say, you're so anti-CEO coaches. Look at Tomlin. Look at John Harbaugh. Well, yeah, look at them. They went to stable, well-run, winning organizations. We have a long history. If you become the head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which only 3 guys have done over the last 60 years, you're going to win. What about the Baltimore Ravens? Well, John Harbaugh, turns out he comes from football royalty when it comes to coaching, as Jack Harbaugh produced 2 elite coaches. And he got to go work for, I don't know, Ozzie Newsome. He inherited a team with Ed Reed, Ray Lewis. Not a bad spot. Robert Saleh went to a place that had a first-time general manager, an owner who most people that have been around him, that have worked around him, that just know about the Jets, thinks an awful national owner in the National Football League. Doesn't mean he doesn't have money. Doesn't mean that he won't fund certain things. But in terms of clearly pretty impulsive, and when you work for him, more than likely you're not going to win. Because I think there's a pretty consistent theme in the NFL that Robert Saleh, if he was going to have success as a head coach, he could not have overcome this situation. You cannot overcome poor ownership. Stefanski tried and eventually it bit him in the ass because now that contract really kicks in. Godspeed, Kevin. Now, Robert, did not even make it to this Monday Night Football game. Don't totally blame him. This wasn't going to work. It simply was never going to work. And I was thinking about the GM. The reason that Aaron Rodgers is on the team is because they had the number 2 overall pick once upon a time. And they've drafted over the last 3 or 4 years a lot of really good players. They've been pretty good at personnel. but they whiffed on Zach Wilson. Now, if you wanted to argue, well, who else should they have picked? Trey Lance, he's even worse than Zach Wilson. Justin Fields, that wouldn't have worked with the Jets. Mac Jones, career backup. Yeah, the options weren't good, but he's paid to know that. And he's paid to not screw that up. So, yeah, Robert Saleh has been bad, but they are in this situation because Joe Douglas essentially had to go to the blackjack table with all the money he had and choose to put it on black or red to save this situation. That's what he attempted to do because the Zach Wilson and the quarterback situation for the team blew up in his face. And because of this weird situation of Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, him getting kind of butthurt that they brought in Jordan Love, even though they paid him a bunch of money and him acting weird, and then he finally wants a trade. It's like, yeah, he's available. But he's also 39 years old. In the last year that he played for the Packers, didn't go that well. And the previous year, one of the best teammates he's ever had in terms of a player said, like, I need to get out of here because I don't think this guy's going to be around anymore in Davante Adams. So it was kind of getting weird. So you were banking on Aaron Rodgers to essentially save your reputation and save your coach's job because you were headed toward disaster. And when you put whatever amount of money, if it's all the money you have on black or red, yeah, it could hit and it could double your money. If you got $100,000 to go buy, put for a down payment on a home, you could walk right into a casino, put it on red. If that thing hits, you got $200K. But if that thing misses, you got nothing. And it turns out the risk with this player, given what you have surrounding him in terms of Robert Saleh, and then when you get Aaron Rodgers, he forces you to hire a specific offensive coordinator, it's always going to come up the opposite color. And this was attempting to put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, and Aaron Rodgers at 39, 40 years old is simply not good enough to cover this up. Think about Tom Brady, the most recent all-time great quarterback to change teams. And he was a little older than Aaron. Now, unlike Aaron, his game wasn't predicated on moving around, but he got to go to Tampa, who you could argue had not been well. They had not made the playoffs in like a decade. But he didn't inherit some random Tampa Bay coach. He got Bruce Arians, a guy who'd proven to be pretty damn good. Well, Bruce is an offensive guy. So what's pretty important for an offensive coordinator? Just like Robert Saleh, the opposite side of the ball. He's a defensive coordinator. Hire someone because you're going to have nothing to do with that side of the ball. Well, who's Bruce Arians' boy? Todd Bowles. So when Tom Brady signed that contract in Tampa Bay, obviously he was viewed as the savior, just like Aaron Rodgers. But he was inheriting, like the Jets, good players, but a really, really good coaching staff. Aaron Rodgers did not. Aaron Rodgers inherited a head coach in Robert Saleh that you never say never, but is not going to be a head coach for the foreseeable future. And no team, college or pro, will ever dream. And if they did wake up from that dream, it would be considered a nightmare of making Nathaniel Hackett their offensive coordinator. And this isn't personal. Like, I don't know the guy. Hell, I wanted to root for him. Bald guy, UC Davis. Like, that's where he went to school. It's where I grew up. But he's just terrible. He is not good at his job. And listen, he's not alone. There are a lot of football coaches in the NFL and in college who are stealing because these jobs pay so much money. And most of them are glorified PE teachers. They wouldn't sniff any job making a quarter of what these guys, a tenth. Nathaniel Hackett's probably making $1.52 million to be the offensive coordinator for the New York Jets. It's like he's fucking awful at his job. So in no other spot in the private sector could you be that bad at your job, make that much money, and hold a position. But the one thing Nathaniel Hackett is going for him is that the quarterback likes him. That's the reason. That's his job security. So if in the next couple of days he's gone, it's clear the quarterback turned on him. Like the quarterback turned on Robert Saleh. I don't totally blame him. Robert Saleh was completely over his head. Every time Robert Saleh went to the podium, he found himself with his foot in his mouth. And listen, I talk for a living. I enjoy coaches that will say some shit. It makes my job easier. But I also understand when Belichick or Andy Reid goes up to the podium and says nothing. What do they benefit from for saying things? Belichick said it the other day, like, listen, we're obviously thinking one thing, but in what world would it benefit me, my team, my players, the coaching staff to go up there and say it's a cadence issue? Especially when you know cadence is one of Aaron Rodgers' bread and butter. It's such a BP fastball to go, you know what? We're going to have to take a look at this. We'll meet and talk about it the next couple of days and work on it in practice. We feel pretty comfortable that we'll be able to get it figured out. And he could do that all the time, but he never chose to do that. He always would say, "Oh, he's in Egypt. Oh, this is going on. Zach Wilson. Oh, this is happening." And he always felt that he was stepping in it. And why does that happen? Because the guy is not ready for the job. And we have all been put in position, I would imagine, in jobs we weren't quite ready for. That's part of life. I mean, that's part of moving on up in the world. But when you get put into a position where you're the boss, like you're not middle management, you don't have a couple people answering to you, like the entire organization is looking at you and you are unprepared and you don't know how to handle it, you got no shot. And you definitely got no shot when you're with an organization as dysfunctional and as, losing and failure is now interwoven within the Jets. It's part of the culture. Like, they also play in New York where there's some other teams. The Yankees, who I was watching the game last night, might lose to the Royals. They easily could. And then it'll be like, Aaron Boone, they can never win. And true. They're not winning in the playoffs. But I do think there's some merit to what Billy Beane said a long time ago. Like, baseball's kind of random. My shit doesn't always work in the playoffs. Like, I know this. I watch the Yankees. They're in the fucking playoffs every year. They're pretty good. They kind of know what they're doing. Are they going to beat the Royals? Who knows? It's baseball. Are they going to win the next round against the Guardians? I don't know. I mean, does they have a couple bad pitching outings? Does Judge's back go cold for 3 weeks? But I feel pretty comfortable as a whole. The Yankees are going to be fine. I have zero faith that the Jets are going to be fine. Absolutely none. And like, if Ulbrich gives them a little life, they'll probably lose against the Bills. Who they hire, like who's coming in here? Will they hire William Belichick? He clearly despises this organization. I don't think there's any amount of money they could pay him to get him to accept this job. But like, this ultimately, if we look at the last couple years, from Zach Wilson to the trade with the Packers, like this moment, this morning, this is the Jets. This is who this franchise is. They are much, much closer to the Raiders than they are the Ravens, the Chiefs, or the Bills. I mean, let's just call a spade. Their owner is just a more wealthy East Coast version of the Raiders. And speaking of the Raiders, Davante Adams, who, like Aaron Rodgers, I think has to look back and go, you know what? Obviously, Green Bay, I've never been there. Kind of middle of nowhere relative to a lot of these NFL cities. Not the number one place most people, whether you have money, but especially if you're making millions of dollars, would more than likely choose to live. But one thing is not really disputable at this point. The Packers, since the early 90s, it's currently 2024, almost 2025, win. Like literally every single year, they matter. They have winning records and they go to the playoffs. Here's what. They know what they're doing. And both those guys were pretty lucky. Aaron Rodgers from Cal, JC guy, and Davante Adams of Fresno State, non-Power 5 program, got drafted to the Green Bay Packers and went on to become stars. Now, they deserve a lot of credit. You don't become a star without having the drive, having the talent, having the work ethic. But they all benefited from the organization. Always consistent good GMs, from Ron Wolf to Ted Thompson and now Gudikins, to having a pretty good idea over the last 20 years who to hire as coach. They've had two, Mike McCarthy, Matt LaFleur. And both those guys, whether it's ego, whether it's boredom, whether it's, I don't know, they didn't tell me, wanted out. Do you think a couple years later they regret their decision? And who knows, maybe the Packers would have moved on from them both. Yeah, we don't think you're worth it. We're trading you. We're shorting you. They definitely might have done that to Aaron, but I think they would have figured out a way if Davante would have been more inclined to stay. And One chose to go to the Jets, and the other chose to go to the Raiders. The Raiders already fired a coach while Davante was there. He currently has a weird situation going on with his new head coach, which, like Robert Saleh, feels a little over his head, has requested a trade. Who knows what the fuck's going on there? Aaron Rodgers has gone to the Jets, got onto multiple spats with his head coach, who now is no longer there. I think it's a good example. Those guys were like born into first class relative to the NFL. It doesn't get much better than the Packers. It's a very, very short list. And who drafts you in the NFL changes your life. It really does. Like, if over the last 5 years you got drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs, think how different your football career would have been if you would have got drafted by the Jags or the Browns or the Jets or the Raiders. You don't control that. And I think both those guys had been in the league a long time, and they probably started complaining about things that weren't even there. And I think today, and I would imagine they're not really doing it, because you know what? They don't care. They moved on. They've remarried, and they're happy as shit, living on a golf course in a gated community. So do I think Gudikins and LaFleur are smiling, puffing their chest out? Probably not. There might have been a moment where LaFleur walked or Gudikins walked in each other's office, shut the door, and gave each other a fist pound. Because we got this right. We're winners. This place wins. And listen, it's pretty impressive, because at the moment both things happen, definitely Davante. Aaron, you could have made the argument because he was older, but still, they went all in on Jordan Love, a guy who had literally barely played from Utah State, and it works. You know why? Because everything usually works in Green Bay. And when you go to the Jets, or when you go to the Raiders, or when you go to some of these teams, like, who is shocked that the Browns are currently 1-4? Is anyone, honestly? Oh, they're so talented. Yeah, they're paying $230 million to a guy that can't play. And if they cut him tomorrow, there is not a team in the NFL, who would sign him for the veteran minimum. He's the most toxic player in the league. No one would touch him because of on and off the field. Can't play dead in a Western on the field, and off the field is a walking nightmare. But yeah, it's the Browns. It's usually what happens. It happens all the time. It'll happen again. It's part of their DNA. The roller coaster of an NFL season is moving right along, and it promises to be a month full of tricks, treats, and of course, touchdowns. At DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Running it from the one or an 80-yard bomb. We don't care how they score touchdowns. We want to bet on them. DraftKings heard us and is delivering. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple, like a player to score a touchdown. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. Here's a reason for new customers to do a touchdown dance of their own. Bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. Today represents a lot of different things. I said it when I went to the combine. Like, you feel it walking around. Like, yeah, these teams have no shot. They're going to lose. And the same teams lose over and over and over again. Whether it's the owner never knowing who to hire, whether it's the constant instability. Obviously, there are a lot of variables. But when you are a player and you get the opportunity to go to these good teams and these well-run organizations, and they want to keep you, you should never leave. Because your career, this is not most of our jobs. If I can talk and my brain works, I can do this till the day they bury me. A lot of people, right? Especially now with white-collar office jobs, like, you can work a long time. In football, I mean, the average lifespan's like 3.5, 4 years. Aaron Rodgers' career playing whatever, almost 20, is a complete outlier. Hell, Davante as a second-round pick is shattering the odds. Probably play 15 years in the NFL. And they both looked at the Green Bay Packers where they were winning and said, I want out. So I feel zero sympathy for their situations because they signed up to go to bad situations. And Rodgers and both of them had huge influence on, like, I want Nathaniel Hackett. I think Antonio Pierce should stay. It's like, this is not how football works. If football is much closer to, like, you don't tell the coach what to do, he tells you what to do, and in good organizations, it succeeds. Now, obviously, as you build more rapport, they listen to you, but it's not like, John Harbaugh's going to Lamar Jackson and Kyle Hamilton on a daily basis to get the breakdown of their thoughts for the organizational philosophical beliefs, right? And Aaron really wanted to do that because Green Bay didn't need his opinions. And they were probably a little tired of him. And the Jets would take it. Why? They were desperate. Put it all on red. And then it comes up black and everyone's looking around. Everyone's looking around. I said it when the beginning of the season, for them to have the same odds as the Bills. Josh Allen, they remove one of his legs. Did Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane retire? In what world is that team going to beat that team? And the answer is they're not. And we'll get to see it on Monday night, where I would expect the Bills to beat the shit out of them. Why? Because the Jets stink. They're just not very good. And we saw the Patriot game. And listen, sometimes it does this, and I'm guilty of this too. These standalone games, you get excited, you watch, like, Aaron looks good. And it turns out the Pats are beyond awful. And then he played two real teams. And he looked more like a 50-year-old than a 40-year-old. Looked terrible. And his days of being a high-end player are over. That's what happens to old players. This isn't like what we're seeing out of Tom Brady or LeBron James. They're outliers, but outliers are that for a reason. They don't represent other people. They're out by themselves. And Aaron Rodgers, you know what it looks like he falls into the category of? Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers at the end. It's just Matt Ryan. Usually ends kind of ugly. Ends kind of weird. Doesn't end that smooth. And you'd be like, well, John, Peyton Manning won a Super Bowl. Yeah, I was at the game. He could barely throw it 20 yards. Now, listen, his arm fell off, right? But they won because of the defense. And C.J. Anderson played pretty well. And Peyton still had a mind, but he couldn't throw. And it's weird. Like, Aaron can still throw. Not quite as strong as he used to. He can still move, but definitely not as quick as he could. And I think sometimes when you have these huge ego superstars that make a lot of money, they got a lot of opinions, and they go to these dysfunctional places, sometimes it gets worse. Like, sometimes they make it worse. And I think there's something to be said about the two guys the Packers set packing, and they just won a playoff game, easily going to beat the Niners, probably be a playoff team again this year. Already won a couple games with Malik Willis pretty easily. It's like, yeah, just doing Packer things. Probably just cruise to 10, 11 wins. Wild card. Might not win the division, but we'll be the 6th seed. Jets will be drafting 7th because that's usually Raiders be drafting 6th. We'll draft 23rd and, have a decent chance to win a playoff game. Play whoever. I was going to say 49ers, but we got a long way to go before that happens. So, yeah, I mean, today was, I guess the overall theme of the day, predictable.